Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I'm doing week 43 of my 2021 reads. This week I read a number of things, but DNF'd more than I actually finished reading. But part of that was just because I was trying a lot of things that were maybe not what I would have normally picked up because I was trying to read them for the Hugo Awards. So it wasn't due to necessarily slumpiness, just maybe those books not being for me. Timestamps and content warnings are in the description box below. The first book I finished was Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. This is a contemporary YA fantasy that follows Bree, a 16-year-old black girl who gets admittance to early college along with her best friend Ellis. So they go to college and are really excited about that, although Bree is very much also excited just to get away from home because she's dealing with a lot of grief over the recent death of her mother in a car crash. But while she's there, she actually gets involved with a secret society, and that society is filled with people who have magical abilities because they are the descendants of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, and they are fighting against all of these monsters that keep coming through portals from a kind of a hell realm. And she gets involved with them, and it turns out that she can see magic too. And so there's a lot of things that are not quite understood about why she has magic. So this book is filled with a lot of really cool world building, really cool magic, and also a lot of really interesting commentary, especially on the South and the history of the South, and especially kind of contrasting this secret society of Arthurian knights who are all about their prized bloodlines that pass this magic down. Contrasting that with a lot of what has happened in the South to different Black families and their bloodlines, and what trauma has been passed down and what history has been lost. And so the conversation in this about race in the US especially is just fascinating. It's really well done. There's a ton of commentary. There's also a lot of stuff in here like microaggressions and just outright racism that Bree faces when entering the society that's filled with a bunch of Southern white people. So really cool discussion in this. I think the writing was really engaging, but this had a lot of things that just weren't so much my style. And I think that's because I'm not such a huge YA reader, and there's certain tropes and certain aspects of YA books that tend not to land so well for me. So things like love triangles, things like angst, things like drama, things like a bunch of action. And this book had all of that, especially the last 25% really ramped up a lot of that. And actually even the first 25% had quite a lot of angst and drama because Bree's really struggling with the grief of, losing her mother, and she's acting out a lot. So this book, I think if you like YA, you should definitely pick it up. If you don't like YA though, you might not want to pick this one up just because even though the magic and the theming in this is just really spot on, it does very much follow a lot of those YA patterns and lots of angst and drama and all that sort of stuff. So for me, this was 3.5 out of 5 stars, but I totally see why so many people have loved this book this year. The other book I finished this week was Raybearer by Ifueko. This is an African-inspired YA fantasy, and it has some really cool world building. I loved the world building in this so much. We follow a girl, Tracy, as she is growing up and into her teenagehood, and she lives in this world that is comprised of a bunch of different countries, and each of these countries is different. So some of them seem to be inspired by, Korea or Scotland or things like that. So lots of different types of worlds, types of cultures here. So there's a massive amount of world building. I think if you like things like Wheel of Time, this reminds me of that in terms of tons of different cultures, and each one has a different history and a different kind of language and pattern of dress and all sorts of things, lots of different religious beliefs in this. So it's really fascinating. Love the world building in this. And the writing is super beautiful, especially the first half of this book feels almost like a folklore type of tale. And there is so much in here that is song. Song is really integrated into this. There's a bunch of folk songs that are telling the history and the beliefs and the religions of the peoples. And that's integrated, and it's beautiful actually to read that. Sush, my husband, had listened to this on audiobook last year, and he loved the way that the narrator did the songs. So if you're an audiobook person, definitely recommend that you go that way. I'm not big into audiobooks, but he had actually played one of the clips of the songs for me last year, so I had that in my mind as I was reading, and I loved that. I thought the writing was gorgeous. This also has amazing themes. So the themes in this are really talking about a lot of issues of justice, a lot of issues of families, and kind of what makes families and how we deal with our family relationships, especially if there's some sort of toxicity, if there's problems there. Tarasai grows up in a very strange way. She is incredibly isolated until she's 11 years old. She has a mother, but that mother is almost always gone, and wants something from her, wants her to do something that Tarasai doesn't really understand. Tarasai ends up being sent to the imperial court, where her mother wants her to join up with the new prince's council. He forms a council of people from all of the different lands in this empire. But there's some nefarious things underlying that. So there is a ton of magic in this as well. The magic is really interesting. Lots of very cool themes, just really a vibrant book filled with a lot of magic and imagination. But this one is also YA, and just like the previous book, it has the same things about YA that often don't land for me. So you've got a lot of the angst, a lot of the action and the drama, some things that just kind of jump from high to low a little bit too quickly for me, or decisions that just don't make sense. They seem to be there simply for the plot to go in the direction that the author wanted it to, rather than because that really makes sense. So there's like some things about this that weren't 100% my style, but again, I think that if you like YA, this is another one that you really should pick up. For me, it was 3.5 out of 5 stars, but again, I think it was a great book. Then we get to my DNFs, starting with A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers. This is a new release novella that is kind of like a cozy sci-fi. So it takes place on this world where many years before, maybe a couple hundred years before, robots gained sentience and they left humanity because they said, we're not your slaves, and they went and lived in the wilderness. And so humanity has kind of evolved in almost like a solar punk type of future. But we follow a monk who is non-binary, and they end up going into the wilderness and encounter one of these robots, kind of the first human to do this since the robots left. And so this is about really that monk finding their purpose in life and interacting with this robot. And I've heard such amazing things about this. So many of my friends have read this and given it 5 stars and said it's like such a cozy read, and I completely see that. And yet it just did not work for me. I picked up this book and I started reading, and I wasn't really into it, and I kept reading and I wasn't really into it, and I put it down and thought maybe I'm just in the wrong mood. Waited a couple weeks, picked it up again, and still was not into it. This is not for me. So I think that while this is a book that I think for a lot of people is going to really hit that cozy feel, because it has a lot of sweetness and gentleness to it, for me, it actually landed more on the saccharine side, where it's just overly sweet, almost cloying, and it was just too much almost in that sweetness for me, where I couldn't buy into the world. And while this book has a lot of exploration of philosophical topics, which I generally really like in my sci-fi, here it felt more like moralizing and preaching, where every interaction, everything that was being said was the author sort of preaching to the reader about how humanity should be. and I don't disagree with any of the messages in this, but I didn't really like reading that. So this book just ended up not being for me, even though I totally see why so many people loved it. I got through 56%, so I did give it a solid try, but I really wasn't into it. So unfortunately, not one that ended up working. I also DNF'd A Handful of Earth, A Handful of Sky by Lynell George. This is a nonfiction book that is very unique. Basically, the author is a journalist, and she got access to Octavia Butler's archives. And Octavia Butler seems like maybe she was a little bit of a hoarder because she kept a lot of stuff, and Lynell George was able to go through it. Things like old bus passes and old journals and tickets to things and all sorts of stuff. So Lynell George got access to this, was able to go through this, and this book is really the result of that. It is a look at Octavia Butler's inner life as a writer, as understood through these scraps that were left behind. It's a very fascinating idea, but I found that I was really not into it when I was reading it. It kind of almost feels like, if you've ever seen one of those archaeology type shows where you have somebody who's walking around ruins and saying, you know, look at this, you know, this line here, this room must have been used for these purposes, and they must have worshipped the sun through this window, that sort of thing. It felt like that, because Lynell George is going through these, you know, old journals and these like remnants of her life and trying to piece together the inner life that Octavia Butler lived. But it doesn't read like a biography. It doesn't read like anything that I'm familiar with. And so in that way, it's very interesting. It's a unique book in that it's doing a different format, a different style of analyzing Butler's life. And so that's very interesting, but also it was kind of dull. Additionally, I don't really like George's writing style. She's a journalist, and I don't know how many long form things I read by journalists. You know, I'm not somebody who reads the New Yorker or anything like that. And it's very possible that that's narration style that journalists use is just different from what I'm used to by novelists. I really enjoy narrative nonfiction, but this felt different. The style felt very overwritten for me. A lot of word choices that just felt clunky and awkward, or almost like purple prose, and I just struggled with the writing as well. So this was not the book for me. I got through 28%, which I felt like was a reasonable try, but it just wasn't one that I was interested in. Although I think that if you're somebody who is a huge Butler fan, it could be really fascinating for you to go through and read this. Or if you're somebody who reads a lot of nonfiction and you want to see a very unique take on a biography, something that is stylistically incredibly different from what most people do, this could also be something that might work for you. And lastly, I DNF'd Axiom's End by Lindsay Ellis. This is a first contact sci-fi story that takes place in the 2000s, and we follow a young woman who is really not doing so well in her life. Her life is kind of falling apart around her. She doesn't have much direction, and she and her family are dealing with some problems because her dad, who they've been estranged from for about 4 years, basically became a conspiracy theorist person who started publishing a bunch of almost WikiLeaks style things about aliens, and the government is very much after him, and they are very much watching her family. So not doing a great job in her life and struggling with that, except that there seems to maybe be actual aliens. There have been some almost like spacecraft sightings that have been happening. So our main character is kind of a dislikable protagonist. She is very bad at making decisions and is just fumbling through her life. I did not get that far in this book. I got about 15% in when I DNF'd it, but for me, this is something that is just not quite what I'm interested in. First of all, when I DNF'd it, it had gotten to the point where I realized this is going to be a sci-fi thriller. It went full-blown thriller territory where the main character is trying to avoid, the CIA trying to capture her, follow her, that sort of thing. So I'm just not so into thrillers, so that didn't really work for me. But also, the writing style was okay, but not excellent. There is a lot of reliance on like a lot of pop culture references in terms of world building and setting, things like Soul Calibur and Avril Lavigne and all these sorts of things that are constantly dropped that felt a bit excessive to me. I've heard that Lindsay Ellis is somebody who is a YouTuber. I don't watch her, I don't know, but maybe she also focuses on like pop culture things, so maybe that's why there was so much of it, but it felt kind of excessive to me. And the main character, while an unlikable protagonist and somebody who is bad at making decisions in her life in general, she's really bad at making decisions in terms of things that I feel like a 7-year-old wouldn't do, such as the CIA comes to kind of harass her and her family and says, hey, you haven't been in contact with your dad, have you? And they're all like, no, we haven't. And then that night she puts a letter for her dad in the mailbox outside of her house. The kind where anybody could just open up the front of it and take the letter out. And I'm just like, the CIA is watching you. Why would you put a letter for your dad there when you just said that you're not in contact? It drove me up the wall. I really don't like it when characters make decisions that just don't make sense, and that feel like they're there just because the author wanted the plot to go somewhere. So that was not a thing that I liked, and because the writing wasn't just really working for me and it was a thriller, I decided not for me, so I DNF'd it, although I know that a bunch of other people have definitely enjoyed this and said it's a fun ride. So unless you have kind of those nitpicks that I do, it's probably going to be something that is an enjoyable read for you. Okay, so that is everything that I read and DNF'd this week. If you guys have read any of these, if you have any thoughts, anything you want to chat with me about, just leave me a comment down below.